Welcome back to American Agenda. The $2 trillion coronavirus relief bill has officially been signed into law, the biggest proposal of its kind that's ever passed. But in this time of extreme financial uncertainty, impossible to know if it'll be enough, which brings us to our tweet of the day from someone you might know. With interest rates for the United States being at zero, this is the time to do our decades-long awaited infrastructure bill. It should be very big and bold, $2 trillion, and be focused solely on jobs and rebuilding the once great infrastructure of our country, phase 4. That's President Trump suggesting there will be another huge proposal, but this time for our country's infrastructure. Is it necessary? And when would that happen? To weigh in, let's bring in our A-plus panel for the day. John Brown, former advisor to Margaret Thatcher and President Trump, and watchdog on Wall Street host Chris Markowski. So, Chris, let me ask you about this. That's a lot of money. It doesn't matter if you're borrowing at zero, you still got to borrow the money to pay that $2 trillion. So is this a good idea?
Makes me very, very nervous at this point in time. It really does, simply because I don't think the first stimulus package at the rate we're going is going to even be close to enough. Speaking with my clientele, which is small business owners all around the country, many are deciding whether or not they're going to even stay open if they can last to the end of the month, let alone you're going to have the oversight and the people that are going to be able to look over $2 trillion. I see a lot of people in Washington, D.C. licking their chops over what project I can have back in my own district. And we all know the failure of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and how that worked out.
Now, John, there's talks that this trillions and coronavirus spending could explode deficits to World War II levels. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I totally agree with what's just been said, and I agree with that. Now, of course, most of these treasuries are owned by the Fed, not China or Japan. They're second or third equal. And the Fed buys them with monopoly money. So the Fed, if they all went to zero, the Fed would lose nothing. So this is a wonderful printing press that we have in the United States. But the problem is worldwide credibility of the dollar, because that's fine as long as everybody accepts that a dollar bill, which intrinsically is worth zero, actually is worth something to me because I can buy something and someone else will sell something with that dollar. And as long as that holds up, that's fine. But if that were to be threatened, which this moves towards, because I think we're going to be in the 6 trillion mark before we're finished, you draw into question fiat currency. And that's a really horrific thought. And that is why gold, despite the recessionary forces, is so very strong, gold and silver, and of course cryptocurrencies.
It's still only up single digits. It's not like it's been driving up a lot. And you're sounding like you believe in modern monetary theory. I thought that was what all conservatives were against right now, John.
Well, I don't know. My monetary theory has been, I've believed in it for a long time. If you mean that I think the Fed should go on borrowing and issue things, I do on a temporary basis. It's like if you have a severely wounded patient, you give them morphine, but you give them too much and you kill them. And so I believe this is a desperate situation we're facing and requires desperate measures. And I think the president is absolutely right to have those desperate measures, like banning incoming flights, etc., from Europe and from China, and for getting the whole thing moving and pushing through this huge $2 trillion package. And I just cannot believe the antics of the Democrat Party in effectively delaying it so the suffering of small business was much worse than would have happened, and then adding almost a third of it in pork barrel, as the last speaker is just totally disgraceful.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, we'll let you chime in on that. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, I think that the stimulus package was very much necessary. Quite frankly, I don't think it's gone far enough. And today, for instance, Steve Mnuchin came out and at the U.S. Treasury website, they've got an application form for the Payroll Relief Act. But again, it hasn't got yet in line with the lenders yet, and the lenders aren't accepting that application yet. So that's a bit problematic. It's supposed to be ready and supposed to be online on Friday. My biggest concern is $2 trillion where we're digging a hole and then we're filling it back in. And we all know, like I said, you talk about the pork that they just stuck into this last package. Imagine a $2 trillion stimulus package, for crying out loud. We're going to have water parks in Anchorage for crying out. It doesn't make, it's going to be nuts. It's going to be out of control.
Is it going to be a bridge that goes nowhere?
Been there, done that in this country.
That's right.
One of the funniest things, you see these signs, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act everywhere. Can anybody tell me one thing that was actually built? I can't think of one.
Yeah, we'll talk about that again if you gentlemen will stay with us into the next hour. Thank you, John Brown and Chris Markowski.
How do the American people stay strong during this difficult time? To weigh in, let's ask our A-plus panel for the day, John Brown, former advisor to Margaret Thatcher and President Trump, as well as Watchdog on Wall Street host Chris Markowski. Welcome. And Chris, we'll begin with you. What is your best advice for people at this time? You heard President Trump saying just grim times, challenging times ahead.
Listen, I'm doing everything I can. Most of my clients around the country are small business owners, and obviously some of them are still able to work, others are not. We're trying to help them through this period of time to look to the various different things that they can take advantage with the CARES Act, the stimulus package, and also try to find different ways to, again, maybe come out on the other side and how to come out of it stronger. But this is different than other recessions. Recessions usually act as lymphatic systems to our economy where weak companies fail. Now, that usually happens on a national level with big companies, and we're going to see major companies that are going to go by the wayside. But small businesses have it much different than others. And I don't think people fully appreciate the type of impact that this is having on small businesses out there. That light at the end of the tunnel cannot come soon enough for America's workers and small business owners.
Yeah, John, let's talk about that. Our country is based on so many small businesses, but if this goes on too long, it's going to be difficult for them. What do we do if we're into the fall and we're still not in a V recovery, but we're still just plodding along?
Well, as you rightly say, small businesses suffer worst because they have little funds in reserve, whereas major companies have billions in reserve. They run more hand to mouth in terms of financing and cash flow. They also have restricted, if any, access to capital markets or indeed to commercial paper. So their ability to ride through this thing is far less than the big companies. And I think President Trump and the administration are quite correct in literally pouring money into small businesses just to salvage the jobs, because if some small businesses close, they may never reopen. They don't have the resources and they may get discouraged. And it's a heartbreaking thing when you're that close to a small number of employees that it may discourage even the use of funds. So all the essence was the liberal spreading of funds to them, but getting them to them, which is tough. And therefore, time was essential. And that is why I'm so hurt by the delay of almost 2 weeks introduced by Pelosi. It was a scandal which only history will exemplify, but equal to the scandals of China, which prevented us being prepared, and the erupting scandal in Italy, which is showing the same sort of political corruption that has landed Italy in such a severe state, and the secret diversion of funds from the health service to the government taking care of mass immigrants. It's an absolute political scandal in which Nancy Pelosi shares.
Okay. John Brown, Chris Markowski, thank you very much.